Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Rashan. It's wonderful to see so many people here, and I know that we're all fatigued after a long 5 years. And I think of the 1,650 people marooned on Nauru and Manus, held as political prisoners on Nauru and Manus, and the 40 children who have never known anything other than living in indefinite detention. I call shame! Shame! I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we stand, and I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. I acknowledge the 1,650 political prisoners on both of those islands who have been put there in our name, but not with our consent. Make no mistake, these children are all of our responsibilities. Do you agree?
Yes!
Make no mistake, these people are political prisoners. The callous and collateral damage from the major parties' desperate clutching for votes via cynical strategies inciting toxic shock doctrines of fear and division. I acknowledge that we all stand here, and all around Australia people stand today because we have a profound, adamant and unwavering respect for democracy, for the rule of law, and for basic universally recognised standards of human rights, because we believe it is fundamentally decent and Australian to do so. Am I right?
Yes!
For those who've come across the seas, we've boundless plains to share. I acknowledge that this auspicious year marks the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in a twist of tragic irony, it was Australia that took a leading role in drafting that document. That document has been translated more than any other document in global history, and more than any religious document. It could in fact be said to be the religious text of the world. We also played a leading role in drafting the 1951 International Refugee Convention. Imagine. Yet look how far we've strayed. It's beyond embarrassing. It's devastating. The preamble to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the most translated document in history, reads, quote, "Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of humankind." The etymology of the word civilise is, quote, "to bring out of barbarism, to refine and to enlighten." Look how far we have strayed. Our government has flatly ignored the international, civilisational, rules-based order and chosen instead to return to barbarism, belligerent, bigoted barbarism. Shame! Shame! For the past 5 years since these despicable camps were reopened, we have been driven down dangerously by both major parties, down a vicious slope into an Orwellian nightmare, as Julian Burnside described it. Currently sponsored by our member for Dixon, Peter Dutton. But all immigration ministers since 2012 are culpable. These are crimes against humanity as defined by law. This is human trafficking across international borders as defined by law. I want you with me on this next one. This is torture as defined by law. Australia continues to breach its core contractual obligations to the international community under the international human rights treaties by effectively riding roughshod with some kind of radical anarchy over the international rules-based order, which we hear our Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and Foreign Minister so often talking so fondly about. Do you remember Kevin Rudd riding to a rousing victory in November 2007 on a platform of closing the camps and stopping offshore detention? Yet in 2012-2013, due to a lack of political will and innovation, the ALP capitulated, all for votes. There was no need. This was a man who once preached the Good Samaritan approach to caring for refugees, but then backflipped in a profound act of political desperation, cowardice and bastardry. And the coalition has been towing that same line ever since. Our border policy has become an absolute sham, a shambles of secrecy, shame and shadows. The boats have not stopped. The lawless cruelty continues in the darkness of our defrauded democracy. The cognitive dissonance in the Australian community is astounding. The mainstream media silence deafening, and the hypocrisy is staggering. I actually was involved in running that Baby Firouz case to the High Court of Australia, where the Minister for Immigration at the time argued that a baby born in Australia was an unauthorised maritime arrival. Absolutely perplexing. The rules of the English language under Operation Sovereign Borders have been, cast off into space. We have boat arrivals under the protocols not actually meaning that a boat arrived or was turned back or was take back, and all these different kinds of terminologies that are used, all to keep the reality and the truth in the shadows, and all to keep people disinterested and uninformed. How our government managed to get elected to the United Nations Human Rights Council in the last year is beyond anyone's imagination. We are castigated time and again by the international community in Geneva. And yet we're still intentionally torturing these children, these women and these men. And Peter Dutton is compulsively spending tens of thousands of dollars of your taxpayers' dollars on legal fees, running absolutely rubbish cases in the federal court to try and stop 2-year-olds, to try and stop 6-year-olds, to try and stop women and men getting basic medical services. It is absolutely abhorrent. It is an absolute shame. It's a race to the bottom of hopelessness with both major parties. And let us not forget who is responsible and who we need to hold responsible. That is why I am running for the Greens. The detainees, thank you. The detainees and the children need our hope and vision. Like I said, we may be fatigued, but we need to re-energise for the upcoming election. I want to see all of you out in Dixon, knocking on doors, talking to people and having these conversations with people like that over there who need to be engaged and have these conversations. I'm standing for the Greens to unseat Peter Dutton in Dixon because I know there is a better way. I know there is a better way to a more humane, cost-effective and not unlawful border protection policy. I know that there is a better way that does not involve the barbarity of indefinite detention and torture camps. And I know there is a better way that respects international conventions and the international rules-based order. Can everyone please just imagine that the $2.2 billion that was spent without authorisation by the Department of Immigration into funding private multinational companies to build these torture camps, can you imagine investing even 50% of that, or let's say 5 to 10% of the over $11 billion of taxpayers' money that's been spent on these camps? Imagine investing 5 to 10% of that in the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Services in Indonesia and Malaysia. This is not rocket science, and it's not brain surgery, and it's certainly not rocket surgery. It is very simple. We can solve these problems. We have all the experts, we have all the expertise, and we have an absolute dearth of political will. We also could contribute to addressing the international refugee situation. And we have more refugees in the world now, over 65 million refugees and displaced persons, than any time since World War II. And Australia could take the lead in renegotiating, revisiting that issue. But at the moment, we have people like Mike Pezzullo, remember that name, Mike Pezzullo, who's the chief of the Department of Home Affairs, as it's now called, was in Washington, D.C. last month, spruiking his wares as a dark architect of a dark global order, and talking, and I kid you not, this is true, it could be out of a episode of Yes Minister, but he was talking at a conference for the International Border Summit in Washington, D.C. So imagine all the border force units from around the world, and he was basically selling this dark vision of a dystopian future with no adherence to the rule of law or human rights protections to the world. It is an absolute shame. Shame. Notwithstanding these malicious dark arts, Orwellian doublespeak and calculated cruelty, we are still here. Am I right? Yes. There is still hope. Am I right? Yes. The heart of democracy beats within and between all of us. We are the democracy we've been waiting for, that we want Australia to be. We are defiant in the face of this un-Australian tyranny, and we will continue to call it out, won't we?
Yes!
Because we live in a world of truth, not a world of alternative facts, secrecy, Orwellian double-speak and redefinitions, state-controlled press conferences and fake news. We will speak plainly. These are crimes against humanity. Please, what are these?
Crimes against humanity!
The system is badly broken and in need of urgent repair. We all need to step up to the plate, embrace hope and shut down the doors of Dutton's dangerous power. We must remove this man from office, remove this government from office. I'm nearly there. So we have a message for both major parties, that they will be held accountable for their crimes against humanity for the last 5 years. And I want you to shout your responses all the way to Canberra. Did you, any of you, ever consent to this system of arbitrary, indefinite detention and torture? No! Do you trust this government on respecting the international rule of law?
No!
Do you trust or believe this government on border protection?
No!
Are you committed to throwing these barbarians out of office?
Yes!
Will you join me in building this movement to take back our democracy?
Yes!
This is not a case of yes we can. It's a case of yes we bloody well will. We are building a movement for a Dutton-free future, for a torture-free future, so that with courage we will all combine to advance Australia fair. Thank you.